concentration of strange phenomena, and we just don't know why.
The investigation enters a new phase.
This is going to blow you away. What is that
in the corner? What was that?
This could be far stranger than ghosts and aliens.
There's light phenomenon, there's sound phenomenon, and there's energy phenomenon.
This is like another Skinwalker Ranch. The parallels are stunning.
Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. New season Tuesday, June 4th. Part of History's Strange and Unusual. Only on the History Channel.
All right. Here now, and I have Andrew Bustamante and Paul Beban. And I hope I sort of pronounced that right, Paul. Did I?
Beban.
Yeah, Beban. That's kind of what I said,
yeah.
I think. Yeah. Welcome to you both. And you have a show premiering actually tomorrow, Tuesday. And it's Beyond Skinwalker Ranch Season 2. And pretty exciting that it's always exciting when the Season 2 actually, gets signed in. You had enough of an audience to go another season, which is always a relief, I'm sure.
Well, one of the things that's nice about what we're working on, Martin, is, the audience is really just the icing on the cake. The research has to be done anyways. And the Skinwalker team is running their research year round. We are an expansion of the Skinwalker team. So the fact that we get to take an audience with us is really beneficial, but it's not the primary name of the game. We're not your typical reality TV show. We're more like a documentary investigation.
Wow. Great.
Yeah. And to Andy's point, sorry, just to jump in, the Skinwalker team has been running all over that ranch, I think, for 5 years now. And the idea behind Beyond Skinwalker, as the name implies, is to see what other locations may have similar phenomena, may have connections that help that team better understand what's going on there. And also just to get a better sense of the national and potentially global scope of all of these phenomenon experiences. So like Andy said, this is not sort of your typical reality TV show. It's sort of a reality TV show that chases a couple of people around as we try to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, and Paul and I don't make it easy. We don't make it easy for everybody else to keep up. I'll tell you what, we've been knee deep this second year of investigation, Paul. We've been knee deep in a swamp. We've frozen our tails off in the snow. We've had high winds. We've been deep underground in cave systems. We have a pretty amazing crew that keeps up with us.
Yeah, when we say there's new highs and lows, we mean that in a good way. The lows are actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Not a bad thing.
No, how do you have, is there a different team that chooses? Because I actually, after doing this show for 13 years, I have some ideas on places and locations and things that happen just by people I've talked with. Who is your scout? Who finds the places and the people? I mean, is that something all done through your team there?
Actually, Paul and I are the ones that have the final say in wherever we go and what investigative exercises we want to take in those locations. So we have all sorts of support staff. We have production teams, research teams, development teams, equipment teams, transportation teams. But at the end of the day, we really don't do anything we don't want to do. And we want to find the leads that are the hottest, most exciting, most likely to yield results. So Martin, for you or anybody who watches or listens to your show, anybody who has a suggestion, the place to go is really to connect with our head of research for the project. And Kirby, who's on our team, can connect you with those names. And then, of course, from there, it all gets vetted through the system to make sure the location is safe and appropriate and has the kind of history that we need to really sink our teeth and our investment into it.
Yeah, and we're really in kind of constant consultation and communication with the team at Skinwalker, with Eric and Travis there. They've got sort of deep expertise and experience in all of these phenomena and methods of investigation. So we'll consult with them, before we go to a location. As you see on the show, we're talking about what we might do, what we won't do, what we're hoping to find out, what the backstory is for these places, what kind of equipment we think is going to make sense. So it's a constant cycle. But of course, if anyone in your audience or in our audience in general is interested in sending us some ideas, you can find us on Twitter. That's an easy place to shoot us, connect to us. The whole Skinwalker team is on Twitter. Brandon Fugel the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, very active on Twitter, always fielding ideas. So, we're out there. We're not hard to find one way or another.
Now I have to ask you this question, and this is for an opinion, and I'd like to hear both of your sides on this, is why, and this is a mystery to me since I've been looking at this topic, why the hotspots? Why certain areas? Why do certain areas, do you think, attract, activity like the Bridgewater Triangle? I know you went there. Of course, Skinwalker Ranch, and there's supposed to be a place in Georgia too. I've heard about too. I don't know exactly what it is, but why would you suppose that things happen in a given area over and over?
Paul, do you have an answer you're ready with so far?
I think as far as the question of why some hotspots may or may not be, or why these phenomena seem to be concentrated in particular locations, I think one thing that Andy and I have learned throughout our investigations is that there may be historical factors involved. The people who once upon a time, whether it's in deep history or more recent history, inhabited these places. It may be related to the geology, the underlying geology. It may be related to sort of maybe more esoteric factors, if you want to call it that, the spiritual component of a particular place. I think it's sort of a, for lack of a better term, it's sort of a witch's brew, and you just never know why a place has certain activity or certain characteristics. None of the places are the same, right? There is no sort of precise analog, for example, for Skinwalker Ranch. We've found certain places that have a lot of characteristics that are similar to Skinwalker, but other places are completely different. So I think every place is unique and sort of idiosyncratic in its sort of manifestations of these phenomena. And I wouldn't say there's any sort of particular essential ingredient. You really just never know what you're going to get, but you start with a story. You start with what people have experienced, and you go from there.
Right.
Yeah, I'll add to what Paul's saying, Martin, because what we found in the data side and the investigative side is that there almost always seems to be some sort of natural terrestrial anomaly in every one of these locations. Almost like in order for a hotspot to exist, there must first be some sort of anomalous terrestrial activity there first. Or if not first, the hotspot was created by some sort of external factor that left a fingerprint of some sort of terrestrial phenomenon or terrestrial anomaly. So whether that's a high magnetic energy level, whether that's some sort of energy vortex or a change in the magnetic spectrum, whether that's radiation based, whether that's something in terms of a center point where energy or transmissions are sent or released, or whether that's a place where they're received. What we seem to find over and over again is a terrestrial anomaly paired with these unexplained high strangeness. And for me, that's been something that's been really powerful to see from location to location. Because, here in my backyard or there in your backyard, Martin, the Earth acts like the Earth. It's normal. Radiation levels are normal. Yeah. Magnetic energy readings are normal. Radio spectrum energies are normal. But in these hotspots, something about the Earth isn't working the normal way. We don't know why, but that seems to be a telltale sign that there's a hotspot nearby.
Another thing, I had a friend who passed away, Lee Spiegel, really well-known, great guy, that investigated with J. Allen Hynek years ago, back in the 70s. These police officers kept, contacting J. Allen Hynek and said, hey, there's this triangle UFO that keeps showing up. And so Lee took the trip down there to see what's going on, and the thing flew right over them, shone the light down right at their feet and everything. And they all witnessed, the police officers and him, about 6 people or so. And so the thing is, don't you think it's weird that, say, a UFO, for instance, shows up at the same place night after night? And when it, if it basically got here from wherever it came from, it could go anywhere in the world, yet a lot of times people report the same thing showing up over and over in a certain location. Very strange to me.
Well, I'll take it a step further because Paul, I'm sure when you heard that story, you thought the same thing I did. How many different places in the country, in just the United States, have we been where the story is almost exactly the same? A triangular UFO at low altitude that seems to stop or hover and shine a light down on multiple witnesses, right? We've had that in Arizona. We've had that in Massachusetts. We're hearing about it now in Atlanta. How is it that such a consistent story can exist in such geographically different places? And to your point again, Martin, over and over again.
Yeah. It's really a mystery. Now, when you went to the Bridgewater Triangle, I had recently Melanie Kirchendorfer from. She was in the Berkshire's UFO incident on the Unsolved Mystery. She was in that, and she was on. And her thoughts are, and I saw that when I watched the episode of when you were at the Bridgewater Triangle. She thinks it's all about King Philip's War and how brutal that was. And I know that came up when you two were there.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I mean, so the that gets to what I mentioned a little earlier, the idea of sort of the more spiritual aspect of some of these places. Is there sort of an energy that's left behind after that kind of conflict or bloodshed? Is it really, sort of a human history sort of energy pathway or energetic residue of some kind that is present in these places that is durable and persistent across, in that case, it would be centuries. That's, I think that's an enduring mystery, and why these phenomena seem to be attached to places of either extreme violence or extreme trauma or otherwise sort of intense human emotion or activity is an open question, right? I mean, Skinwalker Ranch itself is on the border of a historic conflict between two Native American tribes and supposedly a cursed landscape. So, that's an open question, and I think one of the big ones that we're trying to understand.
Yeah, Paul and I have seen a number of evidentiary pieces that point in the direction of trauma, like whether that's the experiencer themselves having some sort of acute, intense, traumatic moment when they encounter something unidentified or something alien, or whether that is a history of trauma that existed in a civilization or a location at some point in time. Either way, with what modern science teaches us about energy and energy transfer, there does seem to be some sort of correlation between the energy that we can create within ourselves as bio batteries, right? Biological batteries as a human being, and transferring that energy to the environment around us, whether that's like the King Philip's War, where hundreds of people were killed in a swamp, or whether that's an incident like what we saw in North Carolina with
Chris.
Yeah, with Chris Bledsoe, where a very acute moment of trauma, but just a few small witnesses, right? 6 witnesses or 5 witnesses total, but a very, very intense moment in time.
There is a case of what was called the most haunted house in the country in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut. And it's fascinating. But the young child that lived there was adopted. She was Native American adopted, and she was getting bullied at school. And then I don't know if you ever heard about this, but all these firemen and policemen were all there because there was something going on at the house. And someone I actually know saw a 200-pound refrigerator lift up and move across the floor and bang down. And, things are constantly happening. And and as soon as the girl left, the thing stopped when she was gone. So you talk about trauma. She was having trauma in schools. It's almost like whatever it was. And I have to say that I myself have had something, I don't know if it was a poltergeist, but things happened right in front of me in a house that I was cleaning out for antiques. And I don't know what the hell it was. I can't say that I know what it was, but something was doing whatever it was doing.
What's interesting is in the second year of our investigation, the idea of the the link between strangeness and human consciousness has become very strong. I think in our first year of investigation, Paul, there were people who proposed that there might be a connection there. But in our second year results, what we're finding is that there may be more there than we previously anticipated. And as folks who follow along with our documentary will find, we delve fairly deeply into the consciousness aspect of it. In fact, Dr. Travis Taylor has a very clear vision, a very clear theory about how people in a group essentially create a unique energy signature, because all of their brains and their brain energies and their bioenergies all kind of sync together to create a unique fingerprint in that moment of time. Whereas, for example, if Paul and I were somewhere alone, we would have one energy pattern. But Martin, as soon as you join Paul and I, the three of us together as a group create a completely separate energy pattern. So not only is there an element of the phenomenon existing independently, but there's also an element of the observer effect when an outside person is presented in the same location as the phenomenon, because the energy literally can change. And that's something that has Dr. Travis Taylor very excited, because they've been seeing it on Skinwalker Ranch. And of course, Paul and I have been replicating that outside of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, I've had people on my show that have talked about the relationship between consciousness and manifested, UFO sightings. But and you just mentioned like a collective, but let's go to the Phoenix Lights in 1997. And, like 1,000 people, they guess somewhere around that amount of people saw this thing. And how could that be, in your opinion, related to consciousness, or is that just a whole different thing?
No, I think it's important to differentiate between consciousness and manifestation. Manifestation means that something about your desires have put that thing in place, where consciousness is really just a matter of measurable energies. So, perhaps whatever happened in the Phoenix Lights, had only 400 people been present, there may not have been enough biological battery power there to make the lights appear. But because there were so many people present, that is what essentially tipped the scales. Bridgewater Triangle, Massachusetts, fantastic example, Martin, because there seems to be a highway of strangeness that follows across these high tension cables that carry huge amounts of electricity across the area of the Bridgewater Triangle. And one of the things that Paul and I identified is that, sighting after sighting, story after story, they all seem to appear across the triangle, but within proximity or in some way related to these high tension cables that were carrying, electricity back for the last 100 and so years, 60 years or so in the Bridgewater area. So there certainly seems to be an element of energy that is connected to the phenomenon. Paul, I don't know if you have more you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think, this is such a fascinating question, right? Is it a question of as Andy, sort of paints a picture of sort of a critical mass of consciousness that may be connected to these phenomena? I mean, would the Phoenix Lights have been there if there'd been nobody to witness it? It's sort of the, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound question? I mean, are these phenomena independent? Is it something that is that exists really outside human experience, or is it something that is distinctly connected to human experience? I mean, if we're talking about, UFOs as alien craft, right, then that's obviously that would exist independent of human consciousness. However, if we're talking about, these lights or these energies being of a more spiritual nature, well, then there may well be a more sort of consciousness connection. And again, I think, nobody knows the hard answer. The point is, we're trying to get as close as possible to these things in real time and to measure them the best we can, which is, the whole point of the Skinwalker investigations and what we're doing is to try to get some data, as opposed to, not just eyewitness, but not just anecdotes, really trying to put some scientific understanding behind what these things, whatever they may be, lights, sounds, other physical manifestations of whatever is happening, trying to get some numbers and something we can record and begin to try to analyze rather than just talk about as, whoa, did you see that kind of thing?
Yeah, Martin, along with the whole idea of finding what may very well be a measurable connection to human consciousness. Another area that has come up in our second year of investigation is what may be a measurable connection to the question of time and time space. And when you start to realize, just like your daily experience, Martin, just like Paul and I's daily experience, you can't segregate our daily experience. You can't segregate what you hear as completely separate from what you see, or what you smell as completely separate from what you taste. All of that data, all of that information, all of those experiences are tied together, but we still talk about them as if they are different. This is what I smell. This is what I taste. This is what I see. This is what I hear. The same thing is true in the scientific world. So as we're studying a phenomenon, we say, here's what we saw. Here's what the magnetometer picked up. But in reality, they're all tied together. So when we're studying consciousness, we can't help but also study physics and geology and time space. And it's been fascinating to see Eric and Travis start to share more and more with us in private about what their findings are on Skinwalker Ranch as we bring them our findings from beyond Skinwalker Ranch, because there's a very strong common thread. And those who follow us through this season 2 documentary effort will see that there's a strong thread that starts to make us all question how time and time space is observed through the human experience as we know it currently. Because it seems like we are picking up measurements that might kind of shake the foundation of everything that we've thought to be true about time.
Now, I've had a few people on. This one gentleman named Albert Wayne, and what a story he has about a UFO encounter when he was on his way to New York City, right on the highway, and all these people pulled off watching this thing. And he said it was almost like in the Matrix. He said he felt like there was a manipulation of time while the whole thing was happening. And, and all of this craft was right over him. And he said, and almost like it was never there. It was across the street, that type of situation. But I do want to ask you, when you reflect on Chris Bledsoe, we brought up his name a few times. How do you think those things are appearing so often when he's right there? Just opinions, because I know it's not science.
Yeah. Well, there's some fascinating science that we've been able to record around Chris Bledsoe. And when you tune in with us for the second year of this investigation, you'll see how we expand on that science. So without a doubt, I am certain that there is evidentiary proof that Chris has a unique response to the phenomenon. Absolutely irrefutable. And it's not just me and Paul who are saying that. It's the entire team of Skinwalker plus our experts that we brought in from the outside. The more fascinating question to me is trying to understand why. Why does Chris have such a unique energy pattern that seems to connect with the phenomenon? And is that pattern attracting the phenomenon to Chris anywhere Chris goes? Or, similar to what Paul was saying, is Chris's presence in a location enough to tip the scales to basically unlock the phenomenon in that location? We don't know which one it is. We only know that there's a measurable relationship. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I had when I had Chris on, I had a lot of people, like, oh, I doubt it. Well, I said, all you have to do is watch that episode, and I think you'll change your mind.
For anybody who doubts Chris Bledsoe, I would challenge them to find their way to sit next to Chris Bledsoe. Sit across the coffee table from Chris Bledsoe. Spend 15 minutes with Chris Bledsoe, because, there is nothing insincere or ingenuine about that man or about his family. And what they've had to experience is unique. I mean, 0.0001% of people experience what that family has had to go through. And for them to still be so transparent and honest about their experience is really something to admire. But things are different when you are in Chris Bledsoe's presence. And until you experience it yourself, you really don't have a foot to stand on to question him or or even agree with him, because it's so different. It's so different when you're with him.
Yeah. I had John Alexander on my show. He's a very respected, former intelligence. And
yep, we know Colonel Alexander.
Oh, you know him, yeah. So he shows up there and he said, I can't believe what was happening when he was there. So once I heard that, I thought, wow, there really, I respect him. There really is something going on there with Chris. But yeah, that's fascinating. So can you give us a little teaser of what we can look forward to in this season? As you say, that each episode's like a documentary, in your opinion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Paul, what was your highlight teaser that you want to share?
Oh boy. I mean, I have to, I'm just thinking, we've seen a lot at Mount Wilson, and it's not going to spoil anybody's surprise to say we go back to Mount Wilson in season 2, and we were not disappointed by everything that went on there. There's a lot to dig into, literally, in that episode. That's probably a personal highlight for me.
Yeah. So one of mine, Martin, we go to a whole new location in Northern California, and we investigate what appears to be a network of interconnected caves and mountain peaks that somehow, either geologically or other engineering wise, create some sort of vortex. And then on top of that, not only were we able to measure those anomalies, but we were able to see some of the most active UFO and UAP activity ever surrounding one of the center points that we found in that network. So, it's one thing to watch. It's one thing to watch, your stereotypical UFO hunter show, and you got a shaky camera looking at something that's been pixelated in the distance. Paul and I were able to set up stationary cameras in the visible and thermal sector, right? In visual and thermal sight ratings, stationary cameras that just watched UFO after UFO, UAP after UAP converge on an area of high energy that we were only able to identify because of the readings that we took in advance. I mean, it's something to behold in person, and when you watch it play back, it's stunning. And I think the only reason that Paul and I have a unique point of view is because we know what it's like to spend 12 hours out there studying it and watch that 12 hours turn into, 7 minutes of highlight reel for the American public.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And was that anywhere near Shasta?
Exactly right. Yep. That's exactly where we were.
You
Was that
guessed
region of
I
California.
spent a lot of time there, and there's places in this country, a couple places I went, and one ironically was near Dulce, but that I get a feeling about. And I always had this really unusual feeling that something weird is going to happen when I was in the Shasta area.
To your earlier question about, sorry, didn't mean to jump on you there.
I couldn't remember how to pronounce it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't remember how to pronounce the lake that I used to go to there all the time. Siskiyou or something like that, but in Shasta area. Yeah.
Right. Well, to your question earlier about, why some of these places may be hotspots. I mean, Shasta is a classic example, right? That's been a gathering spot for people, for human beings for millennia, right? It's not just a New Age phenomenon. There's been Native Americans who revered that area as an energy source, both sort of malign and benevolent for generations. And that's one question that we were very curious about there. Andy, I'm blanking on where'd we go in Arizona? Famous spiritual
Sedona.
Oh, yeah. Another spot, right?
Exactly.
I mean, these places are historic, and they're not, unique to sort of modern ufology. These have been spiritual centers for a very long time. And so that is, one question that we're going to continue to try to figure out, what are these sort of ancient roots of these places, and are they potentially linked to some of the more modern contemporary phenomena that people are recording, whether it's with their cell phones or Andy and I with our magnetometers and and all of our other equipment that we bring to these places.
Have either, we're getting right near the end here, and I just wanted to ask, have either one of you ever had like experiences that, you know, like UFOs or some type of encounters before you got into doing what you're doing now?
So that's actually how Paul and I met. One of my first experiences happened when I was active duty in the military. And I wouldn't say it was a direct UFO sort of experience. I had a very strange experience when I was a missileer in the nuclear missile fields in Montana that I had no reasonable terrestrial explanation for. But I was a junior officer at the time, and anybody who's ever been a junior military officer knows that you don't have to have the explanation. You just fill out the report. So I filled out the report, and it wasn't until many years later that I was invited to be a guest on a project that Paul was working on, where I got to share that story with him and share with him about how over a 100-mile range, we had almost a dozen nuclear missile silos reflect the same error in a sequence of events that had no explanation. Now, the military took it into confidential channels, took it into classified channels, and I don't know how that turned out. But I was the beginning point where I witnessed it. I filed the report, and then I watched as my supervisors carried that report into more confidential, more privy channels.
And how about yourself, Paul?
You know, I've never had a personal experience. I've always had an interest, I think, in the question, because I think, you know, the question of UFOs is really one of those, it's one of the few things that everybody has an opinion about. Right. There's no one that you ask the UFO question to who says, oh, I don't care either way, because it's just one of those fundamental things. I mean, if UFOs are real, quote unquote, in the sense of are they alien life, that's a game changer. I mean, that's the are we alone in the universe question. So everyone has a feeling, whether they have, you know, whether they've thought about it very deeply or not. Everyone's got an interesting, you know, sort of thought process about it. So I haven't had a personal experience, but I think I've always been really interested in the question, and more importantly, why people feel very strongly one way or the other, because the human stories are always interesting.
Right. I think that's a real big part of it.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine doing anything that would be more fun than what you two are doing. How do you feel about it?
It is a blast. It's a blast. We have great people that we do it with. It's a challenge. It's a job. There's work, absolutely, but it's not at all like cubicle work or computer work or project management work. It's a discovery and an adventure.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way: there are days, even when Andy and I are standing in a swamp, getting bitten, or worried about what may be swimming around, where we look at each other and we say, "Hey, man, it's amazing that we're getting paid to do this."
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
It's like Andy was saying, it beats sitting in an office. That's for sure.
Right. So it's Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, Season 2, June 4th, tomorrow, Tuesday at 10/9 Central. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been a real pleasure.
Happy to be here, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.